Welcome to Letters from America, a road trip podcast searching for the Swedish heritage in the United States. I'm your host, Martin Warren, and today I've parked the Volvo at Trinity Episcopal Old Swedes Church in Swedesboro, New Jersey. And with me in the Airstream is Rob Fritz,
yes,
who is the Senior Warden at the church.
Right.
Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you here. Could you just tell me, Senior Warden, what is your...
Sure. So within the church, we have the pastor who's responsible for the spiritual side of things and conducting the services.
Yep.
But partnering with him would be the senior warden, a junior warden, and the vestry. And essentially, they're going to run the administrative side, so maintaining buildings and grounds, the finances, all those types of things.
Yeah.
And then they defer to the priest on everything that's spiritual.
You're letting the priest do the spiritual part, and
yes.
you do. Yeah.
And we essentially support that priest to enable them to have all the things they need so that the church runs smoothly.
On the table, as you've already seen, is a map of the world. We are somewhere south of New York, which is pointed out there. I don't know where you're from.
Yeah, I'm actually from this area. I grew up 15 miles away in Salem County.
Could you just write your signature somewhere close to that, so I get your autograph on the map?
Okay.
And let's, because the question I usually say in these circumstances is that, well, somebody says that Sweden is their home, they write that. If you were to write a letter to your home to tell what, but for you have to write a letter to yourself, so I can't really ask you that question. But you can tell me a little bit about Swedesboro, because Swedesboro, for me, the clue is in the title.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. So, Swedesboro is part of this area of southern New Jersey that was originally very rural. So New Jersey has the name the Garden State. And it was really a lot of farms that stretched from Philadelphia area all the way up to New York. Now, since then, a lot of that farming has gone away and been replaced by industry. But this particular part of southern New Jersey is still very much farmland. And so even though it was part of New Sweden originally, it became farms. Various people came in, but particularly a lot of Italians were in here in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And it had a reputation for growing a lot of tomatoes, asparagus that would be canned and supplied to the markets on the East Coast. And so to some extent, it still has a lot of agriculture in the area, although that now we're getting more warehouses and industrialization of the area, houses and things like that.
Almost everywhere like that, in Sweden as well. I mean, the farmers grew bigger, and the small farms, they disappeared. They got bought up by the bigger. Yeah. This church is very special, and I hear that it's also very special to you. When you speak about it, it's... I can tell that it's in your heart. Yeah. How long have you been?
So I grew up in the area, but I belonged to a different Episcopal church. We came here in about 1999, and some friends of ours asked us to come, and so we've been with the church since then. But one of the things I love about the church is the history of it. Yeah. In that this area was originally part of New Sweden, and this church, the original congregation, was formed in 1704.
1704.
Which in American terms is very old. It may not be very old.
No,
in
but it's
Sweden,
very old. No, it's old in Sweden also.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So it's so they had a congregation, and then the church later on they built the church in 1784. But
was that on the same location as it in?
No, actually, it's not. So going back, and part of this was my education and learning about the church and the history of this area, because, I think most Americans are aware of the Pilgrims coming and landing up near Boston, and the English being down in Jamestown, and maybe they've heard about the Dutch being in New Amsterdam, but very few people know about New Sweden. It wasn't around that long, but Sweden was a very powerful country at that time. King Gustavus Adolphus, and so they had a colony that they created in 1638. Starting on the west side of the Delaware, but they expanded over here to the east side because the land was available. It was good for farming. It was good for pasture land. And this particular place where we are in Swedesboro originally was called Raccoon, named after the Raccoon Creek, that that the settlers came in on the creek. There weren't any roads at the time. They came in by creek. They settled on the banks of the Raccoon Creek, and so this place was called Raccoon for many years. They settled the land, and they were Swedish primarily at that time. They belonged to the Swedish Lutheran Church. They wanted to go to church, but the only churches were on the west side of the Delaware, which meant that they had to cross the Delaware River, which, in summertime wouldn't have been bad, but you can imagine on a day like this, we've got snow out there and wind, and crossing the Delaware in a small canoe, it would take them all day to get over there and have the service, and it was just difficult. And so they were really wanting to get their own church built here, and eventually they got that permission, or it ended up taking place in around 1702. So they were in this area from 1640 on, but it wasn't until 1702 that they actually got their own congregation. They had a minister that came over here, and he organized the congregation, got money to buy the land. They built a log cabin, and it was on the banks of the river. So where our church is currently, at the end of our cemetery on the banks of the Raccoon Creek, that's where they built.
It's on the other side from where we are.
On the other side, yeah. And so they had a log cabin, and that's what they used for their services. They actually shared their service. They shared their pastor with another Swedish congregation that's down where Pennsville is. So maybe 15 miles from here, Penn's Neck, Pennsville, there's an Episcopal church called St. George's, but at the time it was Swedish also. And the minister would do services here and funerals and that kind of thing, but he would also travel down there. The only road at the time was called King's Highway. So King's Highway passes, we're right next to it here in Swedesboro, and it goes down to Pennsville. And that was the only road at the time. So he used that to get back and forth.
Can we stop just there? Because there's so many, I would say, free churches compared to, I don't know if that's the English word, a free church, an Episcopal church compared to Baptist.
Yes, denomination, So this was originally a Lutheran church. And it would have stayed a Lutheran church, but over the years, with the mingling of different nationalities, I mean, it was Swedish originally, but then you had English, Germans, Dutch, a lot of different people coming in. And the common language became English after a while. Most people weren't speaking Swedish anymore.
No.
And so they didn't really need Swedish ministers coming over from Sweden to lead the services anymore, and they didn't want to pay for that, and they didn't want services in Swedish anyway, because nobody spoke Swedish anymore. So the last Swedish minister here was very influential in building the church behind us.
When was that?
So he came here in 1771. They started building the church in 1782. They got the roof on and dedicated it in 1784, and he left in 1786 and went to Gloria Dei, which remained Lutheran. It was the only real church that stayed Lutheran for another 30 years in this area, where the other ones all transitioned mainly to Episcopal, which was the American form of the Anglican church that they had in England.
And Lutheran is compared to that is more orthodox in a way.
I would say Lutheran and Episcopal are very similar, which made the transition made the transition very easy. Very similar services, the way they do communion and that type of thing. So there were a lot of churches springing up because you had this population of people and they needed ministers. And so if you were a minister and you came into the area, you could probably start your own church. But it all depended on the support from the settlers.
Was that right to call it free churches? Because that's what we call it in Swedish, I would say, free church, and that's compared to the government church, which is not, in Sweden, there's no longer a government and a church together, but it used to be, and it's not that long ago that they split up. It's in my lifetime that they split up.
So back then, they did have the Church of England, and so during the colonial times, the Anglican Church was the government church, essentially, but I think they were less restrictive about allowing other churches to open up and do whatever they wanted to do. I mean, there wasn't really a lot of government control anyway, So particularly in an area like this that was on the frontier, essentially.
That's always been my impression, from school, reading about the immigration here, and that a lot of people came here, especially from Scandinavia and Sweden, that in a way weren't comfortable with the Church of Sweden, and they had to move to create something like a religious freedom or a religious revolution in a way. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I would say it applied to maybe other areas also. The freedom to be whatever you wanted to be, to be able to buy land, to kind of control your life. I think there was less
and start again in a way.
Start again. In fact, there was a lot of they talk about a lot of the Finns that came here who were in danger of being thrown in jail because of the way they did the burning. They would burn the forest down and then they would plant the crops and that type of slash and burn agriculture that they used. Some of them were threatened with jail, and they came here in lieu of going to jail. So, and that was common, I think, with a lot of countries, that people could come here who maybe were in danger of being thrown in prison for death or whatever.
And also leaving for whatever reason.
Leaving everything behind, everything that's familiar to you behind. Yeah.
And coming here, and you have a strong faith maybe, so you need to build up a church, you need to start everything again, you need to build up your farm, you build up your family. Well, you need to find your place, first of all, and to build a community and all the things that sort of matters in the end, you have to rebuild that.
Yeah. And I think the church played a key role in that.
I think so too.
In preserving the culture, of what they had left behind in Sweden.
Still today, I would say, but the church at that time was sort of the center point of doing that together, that you create a, how would you say that? It's like you have a joint purpose that you aim at.
A common purpose.
Yeah, a common purpose.
Yeah.
So if we move forward, the church today, the congregation today, so I know you mentioned you celebrate some specific, typical Swedish holidays in the church to keep it sort of.
Yeah, so there are some in the area that still have Swedish lineage. Rambo is a family that's still in the area. That was one of the original settlers of the area. Matson, so a lot Hendrickson, a lot of these names are still in the area of these families, and there's a few that still attend the church, but primarily it's just Episcopalians in the area who want to be able to go to a church, and maybe they are attracted by it being an old church and a beautiful church, and so it's
but
not
also
really.
It's a symbol for the city, for the town.
It really is. It's featured in a lot of the publications of the town, trying to draw people here because it's a beautiful building. It's on the National Historic Register, and so it's fabulous. But very few people. But we want to continue some of the traditions. Because Old Swedes is in our name, and so the Sancta Lucia that we did in mid-December, none of the kids are Swedish, and we're not speaking Swedish, but we want to carry on some of those traditions.
And Sancta Lucia, I must say, is a typical Swedish pre-Christmas celebration where we celebrate the coming of the light by celebrating this saint.
There's some snacks that they carry, coffee,
and they have that Lucia.
The wreath with the lights.
Yeah, with the lights.
On their head,
So anything else that you can?
It's
the only thing you do.
That's pretty much the only Swedish thing that we do. Except we had mentioned that the Swedes came here in 1638. So on the 300th anniversary, so in 1938, the king of Sweden at the time came over with the crown prince and actually visited Swedesboro, and we have a huge bronze plaque in the back of the church that he dedicated, and he gave us a Swedish Bible that we feature. It's in the church.
It's right in the church,
right there. And we have, and then in 1976, which was our nation's bicentennial, we had Crown Prince
Carl Gustav.
Yeah, Carl Gustav. That came, and he presented us with a framed picture of himself that we have in the church. He
was very young at that time.
He was 29 years old at the time. He also dedicated a section of land in the back of our church graveyard where the old log churches stood. And when we call that now the New Sweden Garden, and there's a flag there and a commemorative stone. And so, there's the tying with that. And we have a little Swedish corner in the church with a Swedish flag and the picture of the
that's more than just Lucia.
It is a little bit more than. So, and then we also get a lot of people who will ask us about genealogy, so their family history, and who do we have buried in in our graveyard.
That must be something.
Yeah, so there are a lot of records. Now, that said, this area was settled in 1640, and so a lot of people were buried in that graveyard, and there's just no record of them anymore. I mean, the headstones might have been wood or sandstone, something that eroded fairly quickly. So they've been burying people in that graveyard for a long time, but the oldest gravestone we can find is from 1701. But
if we go back to the heritage, the Swedish heritage of that, you had the last Swedish minister was when...
Nicholas Collin, So, and he was very influential. So Nicholas Collin came from Sweden. He wanted to do missionary work in the Americas.
And what time was this?
So he arrived in 1771, but he had started his trip maybe a year and a half earlier than that. He went to London initially, and studied in London for a period of time. And it was in London that he learned English, which ended up being very fortuitous because when he got here, most of the congregation didn't speak Swedish anymore, and they wanted the services to be in English. Yeah. So when he arrives, he's well equipped for working in the New World because he speaks both Swedish and American, and then he starts learning some of the other languages also. So he comes in 1771, and he takes over the congregation here at Raccoon, which by that time they had changed the name to Swedesboro. And he's leading the congregation, and
is this in the other place than the church?
It's here at this church, and then he also he travels down to Penn's Neck.
Okay.
The church in today it's called Pennsville, and he supports their congregation also. So he's very influential, and he's particularly good during the Revolutionary War. So during the Revolutionary War, you've got. This area is really split. There are some who support the Continental Army and the desire to be independent. There are many others that are loyalists to the British Crown. And so he's kind of caught in the middle. You don't want to be either overtly loyalist or overtly independent, because depending on which army comes through, they'll burn down your church and destroy your buildings.
His mission was to save the congregation the church.
He very much wants to stay neutral, and he makes a point of addressing this with both the British and the American armies, that he doesn't take either side, but he doesn't take an oath of loyalty either. The Americans wanted him to do that. He refuses, and they threaten him, but he holds firm, and he says, "We're neutral. We don't support either side. We're just going to stay independent on this." So he gets them through the Revolutionary War. Now, unfortunately, the American army comes through in 1778, and they want somewhere to billet their soldiers, and they take the log cabin church that was at the back of the cemetery, and they use that for over a year. And by the time they finish, by the end of the war, it's destroyed. You've had animals in there, the horses, and it's just, and so there's a need to build a new church or to do something, and so. Nicholas Collin is very influential in organizing the congregation and getting them behind the mission of building a grand church, not just a replacement for this fairly rustic log cabin church that they had, but something that's really unique and beautiful. And so he works with the congregation, and he has these elaborate plans, and he spends 4 years of his life essentially overseeing the construction, every detail of the construction of this church. It's got beautiful windows. It's got an upper balcony. It is the largest church that was built at the time for the Swedish congregation.
And this is the church that we're looking at today.
Yeah, this church is larger than Gloria Dei in Philadelphia or the one that was in Wilmington. He had this grand vision of what he wanted, and actually there's a quote from him, if you don't mind.
No, I don't mind at all.
So when he wrote in his diary about why he was doing this, he said he built this church. He started the idea of this church as early as 1775 to assuage the English congregants who wanted to build their own separate church. And his point was, quite a considerable building was my aim. Such a considerable outlay would, in the case of vacancy during the first years of a Swedish successor, keep the frivolous from leaving the church or running to other sects. And if the mission in this country was discontinued, there would be a worthy monument to the honor of Sweden. And essentially, that is what it is today, with the name of Old Swedes.
That's it.
So, he pushed the congregation to finish the church, to get it done. He actually, at the front of the church, right at the front entrance, he put 2 bricks with Gloria Dei on there, and that was his signature on the church, that he was doing all this work of constructing the church for the glory of God.
A monument. What was the quote again?
He called it, there would be a worthy monument to the honor of Sweden.
A worthy monument
and he wrote
to the
this
honor
in
of Sweden.
1784. Yeah.
I wonder if that's not a very good note to end this on.
Yeah.
A worthy monument to the honor of Sweden.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for having me
here. It's been
here.
my pleasure.
And it's lovely. Lovely
meeting.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You have listened to Letters from America, a weekly road trip podcast celebrating the Swedish heritage in the United States. Produced in collaboration with the Embassy of Sweden in Washington, D.C., Volvo Cars USA, Volvo Trucks USA, and Airstream.